Hello students, today's video lecture is on the structure of a synovial joint. So let's get started. A synovial joint is a freely movable joint, and it's most common that you look at images of a knee or a shoulder, sometimes a hip. A knee is very typical because it's really easy to see. And this is perhaps what you picture when you picture a joint. There is a covering around the whole joint, and it's not transparent. If we look in the anatomy app, we can see the shoulder has all this covering around the bone, so you can't actually see where the joint exists, just got all this connective tissue holding it together. The elbow is the same. We don't see actually even the head of the radius or the important parts of the ulna because they're all covered in ligaments and joint capsule. The same true of the hip. Okay, so our major joints always have some kind of a capsule around them, and that's sort of alluded to here, although it's not transparent. What we're going to look at today is if we were to cut open this capsule and sort of check out the layers of it, what we get is a frontal plane like this, where here's the upper bone, here's the lower bone, here's the capsule, and now you can tell it actually has two layers to it, and then there's a space between the bones. So that's where we're headed. Your assignment for today's notes is we are going to draw a synovial joint. Okay, so in order to draw our joint, you're going to need whatever you're drawing with and perhaps colored pencils. I'm going to draw in the two bones. And this is just going to be any joint. It could be just a typical joint. So there's my upper bone, and I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom with the lower bone. And I'm going to color in that whole space, sort of a light beigeish color. Okay, now that we have our two bones colored in, let's go ahead and label each one as a bone. And remember, this could be a knee, an elbow, a shoulder, a hip, any one of our freely moving joints, could even be a finger. And I'm not going to try to add the detail of the spongy bone tissue in. We'll have more of a look from the surface rather than internal. Okay, one of the first things you have to know is that each bone is covered in a substance called articular cartilage. And we learned about that in the skeletal unit when we learned about the long bone, how each one of the epiphyses of the long bones is covered in cartilage. So you see this bluish material here, and then even in the frontal section it covers. That's providing cushion and protection in the joint. So I'm going to add that and then color it in a light blue cartilage color. You can see I'm just sort of making a thin cap on the end of the bone where it would potentially touch the other bone during movement. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab a nice light blue color and color that area in. Blue is the traditional cartilage color, even though in our bodies it is absolutely not blue in any way. It is a nice bright white, although I could see how people might construe that as having the tiniest of a blue hue. Maybe because of the bone tissue underneath. So this substance right here is a cushion and protection inside the joint so that the bones never touch each other. This substance in blue is the articular cartilage. Okay, I've got my definition there. The next thing I'm going to draw is the actual capsule that is outlining or covering the bone. Remember, it's actually going to cover the entire circumference of the bone, but we have to cut it open in order to be able to see these two layers. So I'm going to add them just on the side, but understand what I'm drawing, I'm trying to illustrate it will go all the way around the entire surface of the bone from front to back, just like if you watch here for the femur, just like this does. So it's almost like we're going to cut this open and remove the front portion and just look at the thickness of the layers. All right, so I need two different colors here because the joint capsule is actually made of two different layers. So I'm going to use two very different colors. I think I'll go with a red. And what I'm going to draw first is the innermost layer. And it's just going to stretch up from one bone over to the other. And then same on the other side, all the way across the joint from one side to the other. Then I'm going to take a second color that's very different and put in a thicker layer on the outside of that. And I'm trying not to leave a space between the two because they do actually connect. And then again, same on the other side. Okay, so what did we just draw? The red lining on the inside, and I'm going to use my red pen so you can see that that's indicating the red. That's called the synovial membrane. It will always line this capsule. And what's super important about the synovial membrane is it actually produces sort of a liquidy, lubricating fluid that will fill this space here. So I'm going to put in the notes that it produces synovial fluid. And this word synovial comes from the word egg white because this fluid in here, it's watery, but I guess anatomists equated it to being kind of like a raw egg white. So the synovial membrane lines the joint capsule and produces synovial fluid. So that's that red lining. Again, remember it would go all the way around the bone like a thick sleeve. The green is the fibrous layer. It's dense connective tissue that helps to hold the two bones together. And then lastly, in terms of those two layers, what I'm going to do is circle both and label that as the joint capsule. The joint capsule, or sometimes called the articular capsule, as you can see, is a combination of the synovial membrane in red and the fibrous layer in green. So a lot of times people will just refer to the joint capsule, but technically there are the two layers. Okay, next we're going to label this space here, and I'm just going to point into the emptiness and label that as the synovial cavity. And we already know that it's filled with synovial fluid that's made by the synovial membrane. So there's going to be a liquidy, sort of clear, watery substance in here that provides cushion in the joint, helps keep the cartilage alive, and acts as lubrication so that we don't feel our bones grinding together as we move. All right, last but not least, there's a lot of variability with the joints, and it will depend entirely on how the bone is shaped and what kind of movement is allowed. But there's always structures either outside of the joint capsule or even inside the joint capsule called ligaments. So I'm going to put a ligament right across the front of this joint. And ligaments are essentially collagen fibers all in a line going all the same direction, and they go directly from one bone to the other bone and hold it together. Now, some of those ligaments, like I mentioned, would be reach on the outside. You can see that in the knee. If we turn towards the medial aspect of the knee, this is a ligament. And if we get close, we can see that it goes right from the femur to the tibia and holds them together. The same is true on the lateral aspect. We have a ligament here and then another one here. So depending on what joint you're looking at, if you look at the ankle, you can see that there's a tremendous amount of ligaments holding things together. Here, 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 here. The ligament will be entirely dependent on the type of joint, like the shape of the joint and where it would be best to hold things together. So you can see, for example, like in the palm area, we have ligaments that hold our metacarpals together. So notice, so the bones in the palm stay together. So the ligament is very variable based on whatever the joint is you're looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and label that as my ligament. And I put in the description that it connects one bone to another bone. This is also dense connective tissue, much like the fibrous layer, organized a little differently, but it literally runs from one bone to the next. Not to be confused with the tendon, which attaches muscle to bone. So this drawing that you just completed is of a synovial joint, and that is a freely moving joint. So I'm just putting a little title up here. Synovial Joint Structure is the title of our drawing. Okay, there are two additional concepts that I wanted to add underneath the notes. It's not something I don't really want to add to the drawing, but the first concept is known as an articular disc. And an articular disc, we can see a frontal section through the wrist here. It's an additional fibrocartilage spacer or pad between where we would definitely have rubbing of bones. So it's in addition to the articular cartilage that would normally cover the bone end. This is an additional structure. So you can see it here in blue. This joint over here is the sternoclavicular joint, and the articular disc is this extra structure in pink. So it's fibrocartilage, and its main point is to prevent these two bones from ever contacting one another. So that's known as an articular disc. A specific variety of articular disc is probably something that you're more familiar with. It's called a meniscus. This is a articular disc. So here's articular cartilage. This is a bent knee a little bit because normally it wouldn't be this big. Patella, a little undersized. The articular disc, if you look at a bent knee, now this is showing a tear, but this C shape here is the meniscus. It is an articular disc, and you can see how it's spaced between the femur and the tibia. Even though there's already articular cartilage there, you can see how it spaces that out. One additional concept that I wanted to mention to you is the phenomenon of a bursa. And you can see here we have the knee joint. I'm going to go ahead and add my muscles. There's no bursa visible at this point, but as soon as I add my muscles, all of a sudden these weird little purple bubbles show up. And I want to get super close so you can see how many there are. There's one here that would be under the patella, and then there's one superficial to the patella. There's one on either side of this tendon that takes the patella down to the tibial tuberosity. There's one behind here. You can see really close. It's underneath the quadriceps muscle. There's one over here. So what is a bursa and what are these little things? And it's only in the knee. No way. They're all over the foot. Look, we've got one that covers the medial malleolus and the lateral malleolus. And if we tip that foot up, you see them in the bottom. What are these weird structures? All over the calcaneal tendon. The shoulder is loaded with them. And there's many more that we can't see. So you can see one there at the top of the clavicle, sort of the acromioclavicular area. And then if I get rid of this deltoid, check them out, all over that glenohumeral region. And even this one here is in sort of a tubular format, and the biceps tendon is inside of it. So what is a bursa? A bursa is a fluid-filled sac, and it's made of the same two layers as the joint capsule. It's got a more fibrous layer and a synovial membrane, but it's just a sac. It doesn't hook anything together. It's literally a fluid-filled bubble in between two parts that would normally rub. And so its main purpose is to prevent friction between moving parts. Okay, so you can see here I've said bursa, a fluid-filled bubble or sac positioned between two other structures that normally rub against each other. It reduces friction. It is exactly the same as a joint capsule, except it doesn't include any bones. It's an all-inclusive little fluid-filled bubble, and it's synovial fluid, synovial membrane, the whole 9 yards. If we see it in a tubular fashion, like here at the biceps tendon, it's called a tendon sheath, but it's literally a bursa in a tube shape. So I'm wondering if I can hide everything else and just keep this. And if I tip, you can see the tendon actually goes right through there. So it's just a fluid-filled little sheath that prevents friction from occurring. Okay, and now you're ready to do the short review. And here's where you can pause the video. And at the bottom of your drawing, find a corner that's got some open space. Just do this review. There's 6 questions. And I want you to answer it these letters. So you're essentially labeling this joint. If you think number 1 is letter A, then you'll come over to your answers and put A here. Okay, that's not the answer, but in case. All right, so pause the video here and complete this review. And you're ready to move on to the next video lecture talking about the types of synovial joints.